Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for May 5th, 2021. Let me begin with a short historical note. Today is known in some parts of the world as the Cinco de Mayo, a reference to a stunning victory of Mexican partisans under the leadership of Benito Juarez against the French imperial forces that were sent to Mexico to collect debt for the European oligarchy, particularly the Habsburg Empire. The result was a defeat of Napoleon III's imperial army at the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862. Now, for some, this is an excuse to drink a lot of cerveza, but it actually is an important moment in an alliance between Republicans in Mexico and Republicans in the United States, as President Lincoln was a supporter of Juarez's efforts to rally the nation to throw out the European oligarchs. So hats off to Mexico today. This is an important day, and at some point later in the day, I'll join you by drinking a beer. Now, I want to take up a serious concept that flows from this, that is the fight against imperial hypocrisy and imperial genocidal policies. And that is to look at this question of the rules-based order. We've talked about this a lot recently, but this is a malign fraud. Let me just give you some examples. One of the most important examples, especially when you talk about those who are challenging empires, is the case of Julian Assange. And this was made very poignantly yesterday by Edward Snowden, who mocked the self-righteous approach of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken put out a statement which is part of his typical rules-based order line, where he said on World Press Freedom Day, he praised the United States for advocacy for, quote, press freedom, the safety of journalists worldwide, and access to information on and offline. That's what Blinken said. Now here's what Snowden wrote. He said, what about Julian Assange? He said, what Blinken said would, quote, be more persuasive if the White House weren't aggressively seeking a 175-year sentence for the publisher of award-winning journalism of global importance, despite pleas from every significant press freedom and human rights organization. Well, you want a perfect example of hypocrisy? There it is. The idea of a rules-based order defending press freedom while jailing a publisher of documents which demonstrate that the country Blinken represents has been engaged in war crimes throughout this new century. So thank you, Edward Snowden, for that. Now, of course, this is the same Blinken who justifies humanitarian sanctions, so-called, against Syria, which threatened the lives of millions of people. The so-called Caesar sanctions, which have plunged 90% of the population of Syria below the poverty line as a new effort to carry out a regime change against the Assad government. It's the same Blinken who criticized his former boss Obama for not more aggressively bombing and taking military action for regime change in Syria. The same Blinken who is now threatening sanctions against Germany and other European nations and companies for buying oil and gas from Russia. And this is from the same military-industrial complex which produced Admiral Charles Richard, the head of U.S. Strategic Command, who recently told the Congress there is a real, this is a quote, a real possibility now of nuclear conflict with Russia or China, unquote. And he said the United States military must shift from assuming, quote, nuclear employment is not possible, unquote, to, quote, nuclear employment is a very real possibility. Did you know that the leader of the U.S. Strategic Command is openly talking about the likelihood of nuclear war with Russia or China, even while Biden and Blinken and others are provoking the Russians, working with Ukrainian right-wingers and crazed NATO military officials to place forces on the Russian border and also to contain and surround China? Well, let's take one more example of this kind of hypocrisy from the financial realm. Now, a lot of people are still confused on this because they say, well, we're a free market economy and China is not. China is a government-controlled economy. So here's the line. While advocating a free market, the promoters of this outlook, that is the neoliberals, attack China for the government subsidizing state enterprises as, quote, unfair, unquote, unfair competition, a violation of the rules-based order. Now, at the same time, the people making these charges are proposing the subsidizing of green technology for so-called alternative energy sources and cutting off credit from non-zero carbon-based industries, agriculture, and energy production. So on the one side, they say the Chinese are autocratic, authoritarian in the way they approach their economy. But now with the Great Reset and the Green New Deal, they're doing exactly what they're accusing the Chinese of doing. But here's the difference. The Chinese subsidies are going for companies, including state companies, but ones involved in improving and developing modern infrastructure, which improves the situation for the population plus the industrial development of the country, and also subsidizing physical goods production, which the United States historically has done using the model of the Hamiltonian credit system that Alexander Hamilton set up, where credit was made available for those industries and entrepreneurs who would invest it in scientifically validated processes which would increase the productivity of the workforce. What do we subsidize in the United States? Well, we subsidize speculators with zero interest credit so they can build up new financial bubbles to make huge profits for the speculators. And if those bubbles pop, we bail them out. Now, is that not a state-directed, state-subsidized operation? Is that not a violation of the so-called free market? And what about the new model, the Green New Deal, where we're going to subsidize anyone who comes forward with an idea to move away from fossil fuels, from coal, from nuclear, into inefficient and unreliable energy sources such as windmills and solar panels? So this just highlights the contradictions of the so-called rules-based order, in which the rules are made by people who are trying to impose their financial system and their military order on countries which are trying to develop, countries which are only saying to us, please let us be sovereign, help us get credit so we can build our nation. Oh no, you're going to go with carbon dioxide producing industries. This is the kind of fraud and hypocrisy that has created a bad image for the United States worldwide. And unfortunately, too many people in the United States are oblivious to what's being done in our name. Many people are now aware of it because of the controversies that came up around the fraudulent attacks against President Trump. But for the most part, there's not a general recognition that the enemy of the United States is this rules-based system being imposed by the British, the City of London, and by their allies in the United States. So I think we should go back to what I said in the beginning, learn a lesson from what Benito Juarez and the Mexicans did. They fought for a republic, and they drove out the empire. It's time for us to do that once again, because where did they learn that from? They learned that from what the American founding fathers did. This is a very worthwhile tradition to celebrate, and we should embrace it and go back to being the enforcers not of a rules-based order, but of the idea of sovereign nations collaborating for the general welfare of their people and the common good of humanity. So thanks for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow. Don't forget, Saturday, May 8th, the Schiller Institute will have a conference beginning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, taking up some of these very same themes. Thanks, and I'll see you then.